Hey, everybody, welcome back. I'm Emily Moyer. This is episode number 66. 66 of Words. That's Dani Katz. Good afternoon. It's Wednesday afternoon. Dani's having a shit show of a day. Zoom tries to force us onto the cloud. How are you?
I'm happy to be here with you, Emily. You look especially pretty today.
I decided I didn't feel like getting out of my exercise clothes or doing my hair, but I'd put makeup on. So I'm just like, it's, compromise.
You look great. You're rocking it.
Thank you. So I just have to tell you, I don't know if this is absolute voice to skull mind control or whether I have just unlocked key to understanding reality or something like this, right? But I've been having the most fantastical synchronicities and things like that for the last couple of weeks. And I was just talking to my friend Rich, right? He follows, my work. He probably follows your work as well. And he wrote a book about the JFK assassination, right? He's 50 years doing the esoteric chase that we've been doing, right? And he was telling me about he would love to get balls deep with one of the alternative theory JFK assassination people about just the idea that the entire thing was a hoax, debate it from that point, right? The kind of thing. And as he was telling me this, a song started playing in my ear, right? And not really, but it was just, right? And the song was Island of the Lost Souls. Are you familiar with this song?
No.
So it's like a B-side Blondie track from a long time ago, but it starts playing in my head. Right. And I'm like, I'm going to go look up the lyrics to this song. Right now, are you familiar with the theory that Deborah Harry is the illegitimate child of JFK and Marilyn Monroe?
No.
Okay.
But a really good friend of mine is writing a script with someone who claims to be the illegitimate child of Marilyn Monroe and Arthur Miller.
Okay, so that's interesting.
Which I guess would make her Blondie's sister. Half
sister, right? I'm sure that she had a bunch of MK Ultra babies and, whether she actually had them or they just stole her eggs and whatever. Okay. But if you actually look at Deborah Harry, her features would imply that that is a possibility, right? She has a wide forehead, kind of like JFK did, and the facial structure. And then the body is very, right? She has lots of Marilyn Monroe kind of energy. Not saying she is adopted. So quote unquote adopted, and the time frame is right, but we're just, who knows, right?
Okay.
So I go and look up the song Island of the Lost Souls, because I was like, that is a real song, right? Deborah Harry saying that. So I pull it up, looking at the lyrics, but I noticed the picture, from the video of the song, she is literally on the fucking grassy knoll. Right? The picture from the track is literally her on a grassy knoll.
That's cuckoo. And also when you said that, some other voice just inserted itself into our pod. Did you hear that?
No.
I'm curious to know if that'll come through in the recording, because there was just a woman talking underneath you.
No, that's interesting, right? So maybe the same, whatever that, but the chances of that, right?
You're experiencing the synthesis in your own head.
Right. But I just want to, I just have to show you this because it's so, it's fucking, I mean, the likelihood that, that would be, this is literally the picture from the video from Island of the Lost Souls. In a green dress. I don't know if you've seen any of the things Michael and I have been doing about green screening and shit like that. So it's funny that she's also in a green dress, right? But that is literally a grassy knoll.
Yeah.
It's okay, right? I don't know what to make of that one, but that's how they all are right now, right? Yesterday, I was doing a show with Les Luthor and Nish. And he mentions this street newspaper in the UK called The Big Issue, right? And I've never heard of this before. And then in the show I was watching on Netflix last night, they talk about The Big Issue, right? And the girl who talks about The Big Issue then says, Oh, it took me forever because there was a queue. And I had just literally done a show with Les about the queue world order, right? Like that the whole, like the queue theory with the waiting in line, the science of waiting in line. Like we've been doing a series of shows on that. So it's like I had just gotten off with them. And then it's like the new Netflix series, you know, is telling the whole, everything is like that right now.
So I feel like it's like Terence McKenna's idea of the concrescence and how time is a spiral that gets narrower and narrower.
Yeah, I was just talking about, I just explained that to Howdy McCoskey in the show a day and a half ago.
Okay. Well, I feel like it's like that in terms of more and more synchronicities and the design of our simulations, like just more clarity is coming around it.
Right. It's fucking weird, dude.
Super weird.
So anyway, like I'm not bothered by it. There was a time when like I would have been bothered by it because I would have thought that was like evidence of like, you know, voice to skull or, you know, some sort of like manipulation of thoughts. And there was other times where I'm like, wow, what a fantastic synchronicity. And now I'm just like, this is a shit show. Who the fuck knows what it is, but.
Well, here's the other piece to the synchronicity is that I've only been home for like an hour before we recorded. And a friend of mine in Austin actually just sent me a video on voice to skull technology.
Yeah.
So literally within the hour, I was already watching that and had that phrase in my head.
Everything is like this. This has been like nonstop for a couple of weeks since we got back from the trip to Shasta. Everything is like this, right?
Is it fun?
I mean, it's hilarious. I mean, I don't know what else to make it. Like, it would be wonderful if like the mechanism would reveal itself to me so I could use it to like fix some shit. Right. But yeah, I'm enjoying it, you know. Cool. Anywho, so all right. Well, any other things from the day that we should go over before we get into the matter at hand for this segment?
Did you have a chance to watch that Dark Horse episode I sent you yesterday?
I did watch a Dark Horse episode. I did watch a Dark Horse episode yesterday. I don't know if it's the one you said. I'm getting Dark Horse things from multiple people, so now I'm confused as to who is sending what.
I thought it was just a blip, but I realized the whole episode was them figuring out which is more pertinent, science to a healthy culture or journalism.
Right. You told me about this on the phone yesterday. I did not watch it, but you told me about it on the phone.
I wish you'd watched it because I want to talk about it because one of my favorite pieces was Brett. He's such a simple man. It's so very simple. Sweet, you know, like
it is charming. Yes,
it is because he's like, and he has these ideas that in his mind are these huge revelations that no one has had before. It's really cute. And he was like, you know, this is a journalist gold mine. And I'm surprised that there are no enterprising journalists who have thought to expose what has been going on. You know, this is the type of thing that would get a young journalist a Pulitzer if anyone had it in them to really investigate.
Okay, so I have an idea. So why don't you contact him as that journalist willing to expose it and you want to do a deep dive with him? Do it. Right?
Well, think about it. It was amazing. It was just like, that's why I think I just think his innocence and his
but maybe this is the function. Maybe this is okay. So we were just talking about, I wish I could understand the mechanism by which this works. Maybe this is it. So when I was doing the show with Les yesterday, I don't remember if I said this on the air or right after we got off the air.
How do you spell Les?
L-E-Z.
Because that's my mom's name.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right? It's an odd name.
Yeah. So okay. So I did a show, the last episode we did last month with he and Nish and I, just the three of us, we got into this idea of Q theory.
Can you put me in touch with Nish? I want to have her on my show.
You bet.
Thank you.
So he had done a deep amount of research on the science of queuing, and he had come to the conclusion that this was actually the driving research behind the whole QAnon psyop. Okay. And
did you guys talk about queuing in developing nations?
No, I didn't know anything about that. Do you know about that?
It doesn't exist there.
Yeah, correct. Okay. Yes. I was like, is that a thing?
It
Right.
doesn't exist.
Doesn't exist. I mean, it's one, so
It's like shove and like throw your body.
right. So like in the United States, the reason why this would be perfect is because in the United States, people, they don't queue, they wait in line.
Right.
So they would never think to look into queue theory as part of the QAnon psyop, right?
Right.
So, but in England, they queue. And while there are some people into the QAnon thing there, it's not the driving Trump, MAGA, whatever thing it is here, right?
Right.
So I pull up just the basic Wikipedia page on Q theory, and at a cursory look over the course of the show, everything, I mean, there's like all these different like layers and models and applications and technologies that have been built up around it and on top of it and on the side of it. I'm like, yeah, dude, like this is probably the best, like this is the most thorough explanation on either side of the argument, whether you think it's the QAnon stuff is good or bad or whatever it is, right? Like this is, this to me, this is the backbone. This is the scaffolding for whichever way, right?
Mhm.
And so we put out our show about that. And then he calls me just like last week. And he's like, you got an hour for me this week? He's like, you're never going to believe what happened. So the way Les sort of rose to prominence was his whole Twitter thread on Ukraine, where he went there and like exposed that like this really looked more like the first week of lockdown than any kind of war or whatever it is, right? And he did it in a very humorous, trolly kind of fashion. Well, all of a sudden there was this thread on Twitter this week of this girl and her mother queuing for to view the Queen's body. And she was doing like the same thing unknowingly that he was doing. So, but simultaneously to like pointing out the obvious absurdities of what was going on as he was doing in Ukraine, she was also literally proving all of his points about queuing, and almost like if this was the system's mock back to us about what we had said about Q theory, like it was going to show us how it works on both sides of the sort of thing, right?
Right.
And this thread was fucking fantastic. It was fucking hilarious, right? And so we did that show, we put it out, and then I recorded with Nish and Les yesterday, and we joked around a tiny bit about queuing, but that was not a main portion of the conversation. But something that happened during the show made me think like, I know what Les's next like online move, career move, or whatever should be, is he should assume the role of QAnon, but it's not like people think. He's going to go wait in queues in London as an anonymous queuer and like start to poke holes in this people's ideas of queuing and also of QAnon, right? Like be like a troll in queues that is like, you know, miming the whole, oh my God, what the thing, like, right? Asking all.
Brilliant, because there's so many different cues in so many different realms. It's brilliant. I love it.
Okay. And so on top of that, the other day, like Laura and I had decided that like, we would like to go to Wimbledon maybe next year. And like, we would like Les to go with us. Like we'd like Les to escort us to Wimbledon because he lives in England, right? So I'm looking up tickets for Wimbledon. And apparently one of the most famous, like storied queues in the whole world is the queue at Wimbledon, right? Because you have people who like, they sell a lot of the tickets, most of the tickets pre-sale, but then you can wait in line to get like cheap tickets to center court, like, you know, if you get lucky kind of thing. And this is part of the history and the lore of Wimbledon, is the experiences people have while waiting in the queue, and whether they get in or not, it's like the destination isn't as important as the journey. They meet lifelong friends, they blah, blah, blah. And there's an entire like team and people who make their careers out of organizing and controlling and the queue at Wimbledon. And I was just like, oh my God, it's like one of the most famous queues in the world, right?
That's awesome. You have to go.
Right. But I also like, he has to be a fucking troll. He has to become QAnon, like QAnon, right?
That's really good. I love it.
Yeah. So anywho.
I have a question before we dive in what we're really going to get into.
Okay.
What is your technique when you notice you're running like a political program or a social program? Like, do you have a technique around liberating yourself from it?
Well, I feel liberated from politics in general. Like, I know that the whole thing like is a shit show and that it's all absolutely.
You notice a program when you're like, oh, this is a program, this isn't me.
Well, so let me just finish what I'm saying. So because of my feelings on politics, I can play all sorts of roles and positions without that, but I still catch myself doing that with other things. I wouldn't say politics per se.
Yeah.
And so I think when I catch myself doing it, I immediately try to assume the position on the other side of the room, right? So when like, the whole argument about they're looking at the sculpture and someone sees a bunny rabbit and someone sees an elephant.
Yeah.
Once I realize that, like, I'm super convinced something is a bunny rabbit, I will go to the other side of the room and try to see the elephant. And then I will start to like converse back and forth between that type of thing. I also intentionally, whether I notice I'm doing it or not and thinking it's a problem or not, I really enjoy, like, for the sake of conversation, playing the devil's advocate, or as Brett would say, let's do a thought experiment and see what it would feel like to try on the pants of the other side. And so I do those things. I don't in no way think that that makes me immune from falling into stuff. But I also, like, I see at this point, and maybe I'm wrong, the entirety of politics as like a charade. And so there's like neither any opinion, there's no opinion inside of politics that could be either right or wrong, because it's all fake.
Yeah, totally.
So I have that perspective as well. But I think I still sometimes get like fatigued by insistent people of any side of the political spectrum, where they just like won't let something go at a certain point, that like I become fatigued of listening to their iteration of that. And I like get some sick satisfaction out of intentionally playing the opposite and antagonizing them. I still have that shortcoming as a human being.
Is that a shortcoming?
It can be at times, right? Because like I think
if you're not identified with it, if you're just playing a game, I think that I also think there's value in it in terms of that Heyoka or Coyote.
Yes, I see myself as the Heyoka, as the the clown.
If you bought into it, then I might agree that it's a shortcoming, though I would never ascribe that word to you. But I think if we hold these roles lightly, we're just all playing in the Leela.
I've gotten better at it, right? Like I used to oftentimes start out playing and then sometimes transition into like the other thing. And I've gotten better at like shape shifting with it to sort of assess where my sparring partner is at, and do I need to make an adjustment to like land them in the spot of like understanding that, the shit show is performed in equal proportions at every dimension on both sides or all sides, depending on how you see it. And the same hall of mirror you're in on the right exists on the left for the opposing reason, right?
Totally.
And so,
that's really helpful. I like the idea of as a thought experiment, taking the other side. That makes sense to me. You'll be happy. Oh, go ahead.
So this is something I think I learned from gymnastics more so than other something more intellectual or political or social experiment. I was not flexible, and so when I would do like leaps or sassones or split jumps, like I wasn't flexible enough to get like a gorgeous looking split. So the only way I was going to achieve that was by using power to force my legs like apart more violently, as opposed to true flexibility. So if I couldn't get a split from doing a jump the normal way, I'd like step the other foot in front. So I was like creating more friction or more torque, or sometimes I would switch. Like I actually, with switch leaps, I did like them as if I was a lefty instead of a righty, and I was able to make the illusion of that I was more flexible. Yeah. And so I think that whole kind of thing is like and I do this with dancing too, like the style of popping that I like called tuts, like it requires like a lot of right angle of like wrist and shoulder. My right wrist won't go all the way up because I broke it so many times.
Can you demonstrate for us? Can you
so like it's all about like, creating right angle. You see my right wrist won't do it. Right. And so it's like all about like angles like this kind of stuff. So I can't do this. So I like do my moves like inversely. Like I would make it so it's like my wrists would be backwards like this, because I could more easily do this position than this position. So I change the angles by like reversing them.
Okay.
Right. So like if I can't quite get it the way I'm doing it, I will try the opposite thing. I won't make like a tiny adjustment. I'll literally like oppose the the motion.
Interesting.
Right.
So you're very adept at opposites because you practice.
It's like debate team when you have to argue the thing you actually disagree with.
Yeah.
It helps. Yeah. Yeah. So.
I think you will be happy to know that I have officially given up on the idea of any honest politicians or any real deal change or integrity existing in our current structure.
Okay.
I finally abdicate. It is pointless.
So, okay. So just a few days ago, you made a video about the person in New Mexico. And so what has changed between then and now?
Okay. So my second,
I thought it was a good video, by the way. And there was something you said in there that I actually agreed with, though I disagree with voting, at least for myself. There was something in there that I agreed with you about, and I'll tell you in a minute, but I want to hear what happened.
I interviewed her again.
Okay.
That's what happened.
Okay.
So in that interview, you know, the setup was a little bit weird because she was in the car and there was someone else driving, and she was more going on like a political platform and kind of these rants. And it wasn't really the appropriate setup for me to dig and ask questions the way I normally would. And she has, you know, some ideas that run counter to mine. And I never expect any politician to check off every box. It's just like biggest picture, you know, what's most important. And I felt like she was on point there. But the one thing that she mentioned, so she's a Navajo woman. She mentioned, because I was like, what's up with the tribes like bowing down to the sham? And she said, oh, the tribes have been infiltrated by the CIA. So I reached out to her like the next day and said, I'd like to have you back and dive deeper on, you know, how the tribes have been infiltrated. And she's like, sure, no problem. So we did that interview on Monday, where she was at the Roundhouse, where she was participating in a pro-life rally. Mm-hmm. And she's super pro-life and I'm pro-choice, you know? So I ended up poking at that a little bit more. But I just realized like everyone's running programs. Like I think anyone who steps into that space surrenders some degree or a massive degree of sovereignty and critical thinking, and they just start parroting what they think they're supposed to parrot or what the program is telling them to parrot. I'm not going to run it because it wasn't just like, I was poking her on the pro-choice or the pro-life thing. And I was just like, look, I understand the issues with Planned Parenthood and why you would take them to task and want to take funding away. Are you lobbying, you know, as you're, you know, if you're elected, are you going to do away with abortion altogether? Are you just inviting, you know, a different relationship to it? And she just started going off on like, these people are forever broken. They'll never heal. They've ruined themselves. They're sinners. And I was just like, whether that's your opinion or not, like that's too damaging for me to put out. Like, I'm not going to put that message out to my audience. It's someone telling them they're permanently broken. And it was just like a lot of parroting of like really extreme right talking points. I didn't get any interesting information about the CIA infiltration of the tribes at all. And she just lost me basically.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the whole, that's basically the whole thing. Like this, whatever the fuck this thing is, it just filters out anything. I mean, have you ever noticed how when someone sort of enters the political sphere, they get the same suit and the same haircut? It's like, it's a sheep dip, just like getting your uniform and your head shaved in the military.
Yeah. Right.
Like, it's like that kind of, you know, I think I may have misused the term sheep dip, but I think you understand my point. Right. So it's like that is the sort of stripping away of your own individual ideas, characteristics, viewpoint. And so for some people, it's just one of these automatic things because they are, you know, just like the people who did whatever the cool crowd was doing at school, they got the same outfit. But for other people, there's different reasons. Some of them don't have the intellectual or the energetic wherewithal to kind of go toe to toe constantly. And then others have been activists for a long time before they enter the political sphere. And they're at a level of fatigue where like throwing them a scrap, they'll be like, well, fucking like one spare rib is we're not going to get the whole rack. So just give me one bone. Right.
Yeah, totally.
And at least we got something.
Yeah.
And that kind of goes to the point before about the synthesis kind of stuff, right? Yeah. Like food, no food, little bit of food.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think so, but I think the fatigue, and I think this goes for well-meaning career politicians, people who didn't start out as a politician, but went to Washington. Maybe they were in an entrepreneur, or they were in the military, like your Tulsi Gabbard or something like that. And they went to Washington thinking they could make a difference. And then it just didn't go that way. Yeah. The activists turn politicians, or moms turn politicians, right? And the way it happens is a little bit different for each. And then there's the few rare souls that go there and do hold to their values, right? Or who go there on board with the bullshit because they believed it and then realize something is amiss, right? And there's two conditions that they leave Washington in, and that is like dead or having been run out of town and can't get a job anymore.
Right.
Right. And so like the dead ones, Paul Wellstone and Jim Trafficant, and the run out of town ones being Cynthia McKinney and Dennis Kucinich.
Yeah.
Right. Like what is going to become of Tulsi Gabbard is still, it's still up in the air. The kaleidoscopic scenario, whatever's going on.
She's going to run with Andrew Yang. Like they'll be the.
We'll see. Right. But that she has all the hallmarks of mind controlled, whatever. Right. So even though she's right about some things, she's also super wrong about some things, in my opinion. But so like, it's not a system that, it's like trying to rise to the top of the church council as an atheist.
Right.
Right. Like unless you're like perfect at being undercover with that shit. Right. And then even if you were like, who wants to be around all those religious people if you're an atheist? Totally. Right. Kind of thing. And like the level of dilapidation of your own spirit that would have happen by the time you rose to the position to make whatever like change or disruption you thought you were going to make, you're going to have been given over to some other demonic force or whatever. Right.
Yeah. So
I think it self-selects. It just weeds that out completely. Right. And that's why I think the only way we will ever have political change is through mass non-participation at all. Permanently, not just like non-participation for one day or one election or one, or whatever, but literally this is a system that runs on attention and belief, right? Yeah. The fact that people believe it's real and that it matters and that it has importance is the thing that gives it that.
Completely.
And so if suddenly nobody was voting and nobody was paying taxes and they weren't able to get people angered or upset or enthusiastic and no one was rah-rahing or doing rallies or whatever, they would wither and die. Like, I haven't watched this show, but I think there's a show that I can't remember if it's Game of Thrones or American Gods, but Jeff always talks about it, that the way the gods are built up is by attention. They require a certain amount of attention to become gods. And then if it's not maintained, they wither and die and new gods replace them.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's the only thing to do is to strip the attention, strip the belief, and certainly strip the finances going. Like, stop fucking donating to politicians.
Yeah, just pull our attention out of the whole thing. I agree. I think what was particularly annoying, it's just the hateful rhetoric and the divisive rhetoric is so painful. And at this point, I'm not voting for anyone who's going to do that, who doesn't understand big picture, what's really going on. And my thing is like, if you have the goods, if you have intelligent ideas and clear visions, you don't need to shit talk anyone. Just talk about what you're going to do. And it was especially frustrating because there was a moment where she was shit talking one of her opponents. And I jumped in and I said, but it's not even really about, his lack of experience or lack of integrity. It's really more about your vision and what you're going to do for New Mexico. And it was like, I'm giving you a bone. Are you going to take this and rise? And she didn't rise. And what was more frustrating, and I'm not saying this to slag her at all, this is just my come to Jesus moment of like, it's all fucking bullshit and I'm over it, is that she's a Navajo woman. She could sweep the Democratic vote. She could get every single one of them on wokeism alone if she just wasn't so hateful and mean for no reason.
Right. Yeah, but this is the problem, right? This is another sign of fatigue, is when you're just turned into an asshole. Like, right. And that, like, probably two or like, think of how many people you know right now that like were maybe center right, or even just dead center a few years ago. And now they're like super right wing on, like, you know,
they're crazy. They've gone to the like anti-choice hate.
I don't think it's so much that, I mean, maybe they're convinced they believe that now, but the thing that pushed them was fatigue of being accused of that by the other side, or
totally.
being right. So
it's like the fact that we now actually have a legit white supremacist problem that didn't exist before people started bitching about a fake white supremacist problem a few years ago. We
have a real white supremacist problem?
I don't even know. I don't even, maybe we don't. I don't know. But yeah, it's like when I got thrown out of improv for being a homophobe, I spent a good 6 hours saying the most homophobic shit.
Right.
Because I was just pissed.
Yeah. Well, there's something that is some weird satisfaction you get inside. And I've talked about this before, when people like, they agreed with one thing Candace Owens says, and they liked hearing her say it. So they keep tuning back in to hear her say that thing that is obviously true, but for some reason, no one would say it. And so she said it, and that feels good. And then you start saying other things. And because you're waiting to hear the part you like, you take those on board. And at first you're like, I don't know if I agree with that. But then you hear them enough times, that starts to sound reasonable. And then suddenly it's like taunting other people with things Candace Owens said, right? Like that kind of shit. It's the same with that, right? This is why the Tourette syndrome people always say like shit like that. Like
totally
call people, right? Because they're acting out the suppression of society's like things that they're not allowed to say.
Exactly. Right? And I think it's embedded in any polarity construct. It forces people to these extreme edges and takes away like the honesty and authenticity in the middle. It just shoves them to both sides.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. So I think this is a good time to have the conversation we're going to have today. So I've been meaning to bring this up with you for several weeks now, and I kept going back and forth on it. And it's probably better now because it probably will land in a different way than it would have a couple of weeks ago. But 2 videos I watched of yours recently was some of your critique of Naomi Wolf, and your video about why you were inspired by this person before you weren't inspired by her anymore. So we're going to, for a second, pretend you still were. I'm going to start with her and then go back to Naomi Wolf, because that's farther back in my memory and not as clear. So I believe there's no point in voting, right? But
I'm totally with you.
Understand that there's people who feel there is, right? And
on a local level, I think there can be, but there isn't. Like in the fantasy world that I think exists, but clearly doesn't.
Okay. But there's a large percentage of people, at least half the country, that does think there is value in voting.
What are you snacking on?
Beef jerky. I'm hungry.
I'm just always curious to know what other people eat.
Beef jerky. Like I'm on beef, squash, lettuce, and berries right now this is the 16th day.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you feeling good?
Yeah. Well, what's like, for other reasons, I haven't been able to exercise as aggressively as I normally do. So it's nice as like, I've been leaning out and sitting out and whatever, even without aggressive exercise. And so in the next 2 weeks, when I start to bring that back in, like, hopefully I'll be real happy with how things look and feel. But whenever, like, I do this pretty much every fall at some point, because over the course of the summer, there just gets to be like a few more margaritas at the pool and a few more things than I had planned on in my head. And, yeah. So anywho, but there's not a lot of snacking options when you're in this space. So
I get it.
Anywho, okay. So for the people who still think that there's a place for that the voting is either good or important or something like that, then I think that one should take a look at the reasons why you would vote and who you would vote for and why you would be moved to vote. And like, I definitely agreed with what you were saying about voting voting for the lesser of two evils, or voting out of fear, or voting because like this person is part of the group that you know, supposedly defends your or agrees with the things you think are important, even though nothing they actually did, right? Like all the classical reasons why people, like how you get pressured by your family and friends to vote for the person that you're really having some questions about, like all that shit, right?
And just to be clear for everyone listening, if you haven't, when I interviewed the person who we're referencing, I got all this shit from people who are like, yeah, she'd be great, but a third party candidate can't win. So then I made a video acknowledging that type of bullying, which only serves the fucktards who want us to think that.
So I think the only reason to vote, if you think that there is any good in voting, is because you agree with the vision laid out by the person, and think there is reasonable evidence that this person will follow through on the things that they say. There is no other reason. Right. And then if you decide to do that, then you also have to take some responsibility to holding that person to account for that, making sure that they follow through. So it isn't just like vote and I'm done. If you're going to partake in that dangerous game, right? The dangerous superstition, as my friend Larkin, he's not really my friend, he's my friend, but he doesn't know it, right? He's helped me. There's the most dangerous superstition, right? That voting actually means something. If you're going to partake in that idea, then it isn't just vote and done. Then you actually have to show up and whatever, right? That is the only reason to vote for somebody, because the things that they are saying and doing are in alignment with what you think is important, and you have some degree of faith that this person will be able to do the things, or at least will not really die trying, but, you know, figuratively die trying or something like that. Be willing to put themselves on the line, and then you have to show up. Okay. So I was like, yeah, like I don't see there's any purpose in voting, right? But if you're a person that does believe in voting, then this is the only reason to vote, or this is how you decide who you're going to vote for, right? So, and then, okay, so I wanted to say that, like, I actually agreed with that portion of that, and am also delighted that you've now realized that, oh, there's no point, so you don't even have to worry about that anymore. So yay for you. But something came up in that video that I had also noticed in your video about Naomi Wolf that I thought was pretty good too, right? That you 2 times you referred to whatever this shit show we live in is as a democratic republic, okay? And I often hear people refer, including mostly the politicians and the media pundits, and even people that you're surprised they would do this, they refer to this as our democracy or a democracy, right? And then on the flip side, you know, then you have people who say, no, we live in a constitutional republic, right? And so there's confusion all around about what it is we're actually living in. And then there's the false argument about the constitutional republic versus democracy. I have very seldom ever heard anyone refer to what we live in as a democratic republic. So I thought it might be interesting I know what I understand those things to mean. So I thought it would be interesting to look up what the official definition of those things are. And I was actually surprised that it's pretty good. It's not right?
So I want to be clear. I have no idea what I'm talking about. Like that, the words just come out and I don't really know the difference, but I really love that this is the new symbol for false argument.
You like that?
My new thing.
Okay, cool. Okay, so I thought this was, so this was just on, I Google searched and this came up in like the top things, and I thought this was pretty decent, right? In a republic of any kind, the power is in the hands of individual citizens. In a democratic system, so a democratic republic, laws are
the first one.
Just
we're talking about a democratic
No. First, so the question is, what is the difference between a republic and a democratic republic?
Okay.
We're going there first. So what it's saying, just in a republic, just the plain word republic.
Okay.
The power is in the hands of the individual citizens, right? In a democratic,
dare to dream.
In a democratic system, okay, laws are made by the majority. In the republic system, laws are made by elected representatives of the people.
Right.
In a democracy, the will of the majority has the right to override existing rights. So a democratic republic would be the people can vote to change the rights, to change the laws, to change the rights. Okay.
If enough of them override what the elected officials.
Okay, so there would be not, so in a republic, and ours is a constitutional republic. There are some other kinds, right? But like we have, when they say we have a democracy, like that's, first of all, that's wrong. We don't have a democracy. And we shouldn't actually want one. They're trying to convince people that they want the people to beg for a democracy, and then they're going to mind control them to want the things that they want, right?
Right.
A democratic republic would be the individuals can vote things so a democracy and a democratic republic are probably similar or the same thing. So at least this is definitely what I was thinking before I went and looked it up. Also, the constitutional republic has, in our case, we have elected representatives, right? And there's no, like, we don't vote on, like, the laws federally, only Congress has things to do with them. Like, we don't have like referendums like they have in Europe or whatever. Those places are not republics. Those are democracies. Some of them are monarchies. Some of them are combined systems, right? So in ours, we have a constitutional republic federally. Now, on the state level, sometimes there is a referendum. Like there might be a referendum on like, what do they call it when they try and get the governor out? We just did it with Gavin Newsom and they didn't work. A recall election. Recall would be like, right? Sometimes they'll have like a thing on gay marriage in the individual states. So on the state level, there is some degree of like a democracy or a democratic kind of thing. The reason that people get easily confused is because we use a democratic process in order to get the elected representatives in office. We're not even getting into starting to touch like the corruption and are elections real or are they stolen, just what things are supposedly supposed to be. But we never get to vote on any laws federally. We just pick the people who are going to make the decisions for us. Right. A democracy would be mob rule, what the people want. So we would all vote and 51%, that's what it is.
Right.
What the supposedly good thing, and this depends on what you think is good or not, about quote unquote constitutional republic is that in order to change existing rights, you would have to change the Constitution. Right? There's these things
they're trying to do.
Right. There's these things in the Constitution that cannot be touched without a constitutional amendment. So just passing a new law or regulation or rule or a certain election or one president, they can't do that. Those movements that are what do those in direct democracies or democratic republics, you can't do that in a constitutional republic. You have to go through the whole constitutional convention and make an amendment to the Constitution and convince all the senators and right. But it's not, the people are not voting on that. Right. It's not the people, right? It's the elected representatives. So it's majority rule versus representative rule is the difference between democratic republic and constitutional republic. Okay. So
say it again.
Majority rule versus representational rule.
You're talking about, so democracy.
So a direct democracy would be like, okay,
but
so
the difference between democratic republic and constitutional republic is that for anything to change, the Constitution itself has to be changed.
You cannot just like pass a law.
So we are a constitutional republic, allegedly.
Allegedly, right? So now there are certainly things that are done that like that go against that, supposedly, that break those rules, right? But because people are, and you can get into all kinds of arguments about that, about like, whether we're still operating under the original Constitution or whether we're operating on uniform commercial code, whether we're talking about the United States, the organic one, or the corporation of the United States of America. There's all these things, but even the basics, right? So the biggest argument often happens between the left and the right. The left always talks about democracy. They never talk about constitutional republic. Right? Like every once in a while, they'll refer to the Constitution generally when trying to make sure that religion doesn't affect government and things like that. The right is more frequently referring to the Constitution, and you more often hear someone say we live in a constitutional republic, but even a lot of them think that we live in a democracy just because of the fact that we have like democratic election in terms of people get to vote. It isn't just, right? So there's a couple things. People don't understand what we're living in, supposedly. And then there's this belief that one is better than the other, namely this idea and this idea that a constitutional republic is better than a democratic republic because it's not mob rule and it's not just easy to change things willy-nilly. It takes a lot of work to get something to change. So like that's sort of like a safeguard that like it only will change if it actually really should change and enough people are committed to it over a long period of time. These are what the things they say. So, but for someone like me who doesn't like rules or restrictions or anything like, I didn't write the Constitution and I didn't sign it. So like, I'm not really good with that, right? And even if I did.
What issues do you have with our current Constitution?
I think it's too restrictive, first of all, but I don't like this idea that there's one set of rules for everybody. So even if, let's just say we lived in a place where everybody did exactly as they were supposed to do, and there was not corruption and not all this other stuff, like some of the rules that exist don't make sense for some groups of people, right? Like there's just for a variety of things, but also like the person who decided was not me and they didn't check with me, right? And if I was the one who decided and if they checked with me, like why should I get to decide if so-and-so didn't get to decide or have it checked with them?
What would you change about the Constitution?
I wouldn't have one.
What pieces feel too restrictive?
Just the idea that old men a long time ago wrote the rules on paper and we all have to live by them.
That's exactly what the left says.
Right, but they like the idea that they collectively can make a whole new list of rules that if they just want it to be them. I don't want it to be anybody. Right?
But how do you see that in like real deal practical application in 2022 with a populace of disempowered little crybabies? Okay, so for my own self, like the way that I look at this, just like the way I said, okay, like for me, voting is a waste of time, but I understand it's not a completely unreasonable position that someone else thinks something different. I don't think we're immediately going to get to what in my head seems to make the most sense. But me standing over here, right, like throwing the football far, so someone has to imagine that distance, is better than me just like incrementally trying to do, because there's going to be people who do the incrementalism, but there needs to be some people who are like, well, like, no, like who, like, what are the origins of these rules and why did these people do them, right? So for me, it's just kind of like, I don't need there to be a list of rules to behave like a decent anything. Right, but I understand that. But again, I'm going to ask you to address my question was like, given that the majority of people are not as self-aware, are not necessarily as honest, don't necessarily have as much integrity, how do you think that's going to work for our collective? So
I don't think it's going to work. First of all, I don't think it's going to happen. And if it did, it wouldn't work tomorrow or next week or next month or next year. So I'm just being like clear on that. So one of the people that I listened to in my like, I feel like I got really lucky that I stumbled across him at the time that I did. When I was in my heart, like, so I voted for Barack Obama. I went to the inauguration. Within 3 weeks, I
What? You did?
Oh yeah.
You voted for Obama and you went to his inauguration?
Well, so I didn't go like, oh, let's go to the inauguration. What happened was I voted for him.
Why? Wait. We got to slow it down. Slow it down.
Mind controlled libtard. I mean, I just was completely like.
Was it because he was black?
No, it was just because like, I mean, no, like it was just because.
Had you voted before?
Yes. I've only ever voted for Democrats when I used to vote.
So was it just that he was the D and that was your duty as a Democrat?
That along with the fact that I was I will admit to it being like mind controlled by his NLP and, you know, all that kind of stuff. Right. So, and also I was a drug addict at the time. So like I didn't.
So you genuinely believed that he was a force of good for the country.
Wouldn't say that I don't know that I put that much effort into it, but like I looked at the thing. Okay. What he's saying sounds good. I'll go with that. It was that. It was not some overwhelming interest in him or anything like that. Right. So I voted, and then in between, and then I went to South Africa and Mozambique and Swaziland with my dad and my sister, right? And when we were in Africa, it was fascinating the way the people responded to us for having voted Obama into office. Like it was. I
hope they were disgusted with you.
No, they were in awe. They thought this was wonderful.
Hold up. Again, we got to slow down. You're in Africa. And you're telling people who you voted for?
No, no. They looked at us, saw we were Americans, were like, oh, Obama, come right on through, like that kind of shit. Okay, so there was no conversation, right? So, but it was fascinating to witness, like, wow, okay. And so there you are in South Africa, like doing the things, going to the Nelson Mandela places, and people are all excited because there's going to be a black, whatever. So I'm having this experience, right? Mind you, on like the first 3 sober weeks I'd probably had in 2 years, right? So, okay. And like people are making t-shirts and bags and jewelry with Barack Obama on them, and they're selling them all over the street there in Africa and whatever, right? Then when we came back to the United States, like you land either generally in New York or Washington, D.C. from Africa, and then you go whatever. But my sister happened to live in Washington, D.C. at the time. So I went to stay with her for a couple of days. And the inauguration was happening, right? Because we got back in January. So we decided to just like go down and check it out. And it was crazy, right? The amount of like energy and like there was like party in the streets, and you could feel this vibration of people being so excited. It was like the first time you ever went to a rave and you're like, wow, there's this like energy here that is crazy, right? So it's like, I wasn't caught up in it or anything, but you witnessed it, right? You're like, what the fuck is this? And, you know, that's better than there being violence on the street. So you're like, okay, that's what it is. And then I go home, and within like 3 weeks of the inauguration, he's already doing shit that I knew I didn't like. So I already was at like, okay, I got tricked. I'm never getting tricked again. I'm going to start doing political research. So that was when I really started like digging further than, you know, I had dug further than MSNBC or CNN, but not much further than like NPR or, you know, whatever, right? Yeah. So I started digging, and like I was clearly not a Republican and not interested in anything Republican stuff. So I went through like I looked at like Green Party or progressive-y kinds of stuff. And then I also found my way, because I had, you know, was into some conspiracy stuff. I started paying more attention to like Ron Paul, and I was like persuaded by some of that for a bit, but I quickly realized that the outliers on both the right and the left, so like libertarians or Ron Paul's on the right, and then your like Green parties or your Jesse Venturas or Jill Steins on the left, ultimately are there just to steer you back into the Republican or the Democratic Party at election time when there wasn't enough votes gathered or ballot access or whatever, right? So I'm like, I'm done with all of this. And I had found Larkin Rose during this period of time and read his book, The Most Dangerous Superstition, right? And like everything he said, like made a lot of logical sense to my, you know, that part of my brain that is like, and doesn't like authority or being told what to do since childhood, hence the relationship with Fritz that resembled yours. And B, right, you know, like I just, you know, I had been observing, like even my own father being a political science teacher and being like unquestioningly Democrat or of the left, but not like of the far left per se. I think he has some socialistic and communistic tendencies, but I wouldn't say he's anti-war or any of those things, you know, right? That like I started looking at like how he looks at things, and I'm like, does not make sense. Like, I don't like this. Like, whatever his vision of, he could never like go all the way with my whys. It was always like would turn back into like, because I said so, or because I, you know, whatever kind of shit. So did you need to ask me something? You want to be sure. There you go. Okay. So I was reading that Larkin Rose stuff and listening to some interviews and things that he did. And what he said really spoke to me, that like, there's no amount of government that is small enough. I started finding out about the mind, the Latin for mind control. And, but just this idea that like, we need a centralized authority, we'll keep it really small, but just as soon as you decide there needs to be an authority, you've already let the beast into the room. Yep. So I pulled, just coincidentally, after I had thought I wanted to talk about these things with you, but before I actually told you, just last week, he put out a video about why the Constitution is anti-freedom, right? And it's about a 15-minute video, but I think the first 5 minutes are informative and good. So I'm going to hope that it's okay for me to play this clip of Larkin Rose's video. I do it as a huge
fair use.
But even with that, I greatly appreciate his work. I recommend anybody who's not familiar with him to look into his work, to buy his book. It's very thin. It's very clear. Laura wrote it this year. It's changing the way she thinks about things. Even if you don't ever go as far as he does, just to that thing we were talking about earlier about going and standing on the opposite side of the room and trying those pants on for size for a minute, will definitely change your relationship to government and authority. And whether you decide he's right or you decide he's wrong is kind of irrelevant. It's just it's a very different, it removes you from that right left argument and is just like the whole thing is nonsense and authoritarian, right? Okay. So I'm going to play the clip. I have it here. It's the first 5 minutes of it. And I've been meaning to ask Larkin Rose on to my show for a bit, so maybe I will reach out to that sooner rather than later. Why am I having trouble finding anything that I want? Okay, there it is there. And let's go screen share. Here we go. Let's make sure my sound is shared. And here we go.
Hey, Larkin Rose here. I'm going to make this video short and get right to offending people. I often hear people make the claim that the purpose of the Constitution was to protect individual rights. And I wanted there to be a video, this one, that I can point people to point out why that is utterly and completely provably false. And a lot of people were taught to believe that. I was taught to believe that. In fact, I may have actually said that, maybe in those words, maybe not, 27 years ago when I was still a statist. But it's provably insane. The Constitution pretended to create a centralized federal government where there wasn't one before. Before the Constitution, there were the Articles of Confederation. Everybody in the debates, Federalists and Anti-Federalists, in the debates about the new Constitution, everybody agreed. There was no secret, there was no controversy. Everybody agreed that the entire purpose of the new Constitution was to create a stronger, centralized federal authority. That is indisputable. The Articles of Confederation didn't really create any central authority. It was just sort of an agreement between the separate, smaller bunches of political parasites. The Constitution was absolutely designed to create power. Now, a lot of people focus on the Bill of Rights and say, well, that's the part that really matters. That's the things of, like, you can't do this, can't do that, the First Amendment, Second Amendment, Fourth Amendment, all that fun stuff. The Bill of Rights was not what the Federalists wanted. The people pushing the Constitution didn't want that. The Bill of Rights is a collection of amendments that was pushed by anti-Federalists who said, we're not going to go along with this at all unless you have some guarantees in there of some of the things it can't do. But what the Constitution did was create a centralized authoritarian ruling class. And it was supposed to be theoretically limited. Now, people like Patrick Henry, very accurately predicted that it wouldn't be limited. It would quickly get worse than a king ever was, which it did. But it's weird that people think that the Bill of Rights is the Constitution. It's sort of like saying, well, I got this giant man-eating tiger and I let it go in your living room. But the purpose of that tiger is to keep you safe. You can tell because there's a little velvet muzzle on the nose of the tiger, or there was. It fell off and now he's eating people. But the purpose of the tiger was to protect people. No, it wasn't. The purpose of the Constitution was to create a centralized authoritarian power. The supposed purpose of the Bill of Rights, which it completely failed to accomplish, was to stop that power from being abusive in certain ways. Article 1, Section 8 is a list of powers they pretended to give to the federal government, including Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes. It's allowed to rob people. Under the Articles of Confederation, there was no centralized taxing power. There was no centralized anything power. But to pretend that they created a thing that has the right to rob you and that the purpose of that thing is to protect you is insane. And I realize a lot of people are muddled in their heads between the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, and they sort of think of them as one big sort of thing that goes together, and they think of the Founding Fathers as one big group that all thought alike. They didn't. Most of the people most responsible for the actually coherent, legitimate ideas that backed the Revolution and the Declaration of Independence, they were against the Constitution because they recognized it was going to be an authoritarian disaster. Thomas Paine, Thomas Jefferson, Patrick Henry very vocally were against the Constitution because they saw that it was creating a centralized authority that was going to turn into an uncontrollable beast. And then it did. But the fact that people skip over the whole, we're making a centralized power with a president and a House and a Senate and all these rules for how it works and all these powers we're pretending to give it, and we're just going to look at the Bill of Rights and say, well, the whole point of this is the amendments at the end that were supposed to keep the man-eating tiger a little bit more in line. No, that's just not reality. The Constitution is anti-freedom.
Okay, so I will attach the rest, the video and the links below so people can watch the whole thing, right? And his book, The Most Dangerous Superstition, goes into a lot more like background about where the different styles of thinking about this come from and how he got to where his journey from, you know, being a like Republican to a minarchist to an anarchist and whatever. But what I appreciate about Larkin is he's really, really principled, and he has not given way to fatigue and started grabbing for scraps as many people who were in on the conversation with him when he started have. You wouldn't believe how many people who once agreed with him were like legitimate, like alt-right, far alt-right. They got into that, or they became MAGA Republicans or whatever, right? And it wasn't because they actually like, there's two possibilities. Either they never really believed the stuff they were saying before, or they got fatigued and they would just like, if you throw one bone, if you do one thing that sounds better than what we have now, I'm on board with that. And for fuck being principled. Yeah. He has been principled while allowing his thinking to evolve, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't like these people who are just like, I haven't changed at all. It's the left that's changed, or it's the right that's changed. And I understand why that's a good argument for the theatrics of it. You know, the left left me, not the other way around. But we should all, I'd hope that everyone's thinking is evolving over time. Yeah. He's managed to stay principled while evolving his thinking. A lot of people who haven't evolved their thinking, but agree with a lot of the things he does, like they think that people who don't know all that stuff or believe all that stuff are like unworthy of wasting time trying to explain things to or whatever. He doesn't at all. Like when he saw, when the trucker thing happened in Canada, like he was like I'm donating thousands of my books to the people who are willing to drive them up there and hand them out to people. And everyone's like, but the trucker thing is a hoax. It's a psyop and da-da-da-da-da. He's like, I don't care if it is. My guess would be with as many people as up there, there's a few people in the place that they're ready to change their mind about some things and see and have the wool pulled down. I'm sending them. I'm going to have faith in humanity and trust in humanity that, that the ideas are good. People, at least a few, will internalize them or think about them or whatever. Right. And he's not, I'm sure there was a time when he was more cynical. It's hard not to or whatever, but he's evolved to the place where like any person is capable of understanding this at some point. And so if I catch them in the right moment, all it takes is a minute for something to click, and whether they come all the way to my side or they just give up their belief in the dangerous superstition of the legitimacy of government, either way, like that's a step in progress for humankind, right? And he always has a good sense of humor, and he never gets tired of teaching people about this. He's not like, well, you just have to go back and look at my old shit or look at this or look at that. He always finds new and different ways to present the same information, hoping that it'll click in a way that it didn't click for someone before or whatnot. And he hasn't lost his mind doing this. Mm-hmm. Right. And so, yeah. So what did you think of that?
It all resonated. Now I'm excited to read his book. I mean, I don't know much about this. I was educated in our country under our shitty Reagan curriculum. So I'm not an expert on the Constitution or Democratic Republic or any of that stuff. So I appreciate this conversation. And I want to learn more about how I've been snowed regarding the Constitution.
So I think the first step, because it's a lot to take on, right? But just start like how we play a drinking game with Brett about like every time he says like emergent or any of those few terms, he has a couple like novel.
We had a new one yesterday.
Hyper novelty, like he has like 5 or 7 terms that he really likes, and I don't know if those are like in his CIA manual or his George Soros manual. I don't know. I'm sure he has a couple of manuals. But is start paying attention to every time you hear a politician, a pundit, an activist, or whatever say our democracy. Okay, we don't have, there's like the only thing we have, like we do, like there's democratic elections. People get to vote.
Right.
I'm not, again, we're leaving the corruption and the stealing of elections out of this for now. But a democracy would be that if everybody decided tomorrow that abortion, like if 51% of the people voted that abortions should be outlawed countrywide, then that would be the law of the land.
Yeah.
Right. It would be if everyone decided, 51% of people tomorrow decided there was no freedom of speech, that we should hire Tristan Harris to censor, newspapers and whatever it is, right? Then that's what it would be, right? And that the constitutional republic is this idea that something, that is representative. So that is, some people think that's better because you think that the person you're electing to represent you wouldn't be as easily swayed by bullshit as a person on the street because they have experience and they have people come, whatever kind of thing. But that also leads way to corruption.
Yep.
Right. And not that corruption can't happen in a direct democracy. People can be paid for their votes. People can be promised things if they vote this way or the other way by, certain entities. So it's all bullshit. Right. Yeah. But the one that you'll start to notice is even Tulsi Gabbard, who has been in our government and in our military and knows that we live in a constitutional republic, goes on Fox News and calls it our democracy, and none of those right-wingers correct her because they're on board with that. Right. They're on board with like here. So democracy is like, I don't know if I would want to say it's less freedom than a constitutional republic because, right. But it's like more rule by stupidity or maybe more rule by like just the whims of the moment.
Yep.
I think the thing, and this is where I really like agree with his point about like, it's this huge tiger in the living room. The reason the Constitution,
the tiny velvet mask,
the Constitution, the reason America's obsession with the Constitution and all this bullshit is so dangerous is because the people here believe they're free. The people who are in other forms of government know that they're not.
Right.
You talked about how pernicious that idea is.
Are there countries you know of that have legit freedom, not our fake freedom?
My guess would be that if that does exist, then we are told that those are banana republics so that we don't have any interest in exploring that further. Right. So I think it's all relative. It depends on what you want. It depends on what your line of thought is and what your political opinions are and what your desires for yourself and your career and your family and your all that stuff are. Like, I don't think, and it goes the same within the United States with states. Like, there's no perfect state, right? I was listening to a three-way conversation on Reason TV between the guy from Reason TV and like another person who works for Reason and this woman who's a columnist for the New York Post. And two of the, like the guy who runs Reason TV, he's a libertarian, he lives in New York. The guy who writes for Reason, he's a libertarian, he just moved from California to Florida. And the woman is a columnist for the New York Post who just moved from New York to Florida, and she's a Republican, right? And so they were having this debate about like whether, or ultimately at the end of the day, whether Ron DeSantis was good for liberty or not good for liberty. And they talked about a lot of issues in relationship to it. And in some ways it was a lame conversation, but in other ways it was a really good conversation and kind of enlightening on some things. There's no perfect state. So you have to decide like what things are important to you, right? And understand that like that you're going to have to prioritize the things that are most important to you. And the cost is going to be that you're going to have to accept something that you don't agree with. Mm-hmm. Right. And so like for me, like that with there's a couple things when we decided to move here and how we continue to feel being here is that for us, the combination of being in a blue city and a red state works. Right. Because a lot of the things that we like about like arts and culture and things like that seem to be dominated by the left, but their ability to make law or rule out of it is tempered by the state government and by the fact that they're surrounded by counties that like have people have lots of guns and, you know, whatever kind of thing. Right. And here I don't have to wear a mask or have a vaccine to get a job or do any of that kind of stuff. I don't like the law that Greg Abbott passed about, you know, after 6 weeks, like it's not, there's no criminal law against abortion, but citizens can take other citizens or doctors to civil court and make their lives miserable. I don't like that. Right. But I don't have, I'm not planning, I'm not pregnant. I'm not planning to get pregnant, whether accidentally or on purpose or whatever. And so it's a issue that is a little farther away from me. Mm-hmm. And I encourage the people, I disagree with it. And I know a lot of people who are violently opposed to it. And I take the opportunity to encourage them to maybe support the people that they disagree with to make sure that they're safeguarded and never having to take a vaccine against their will and forming a coalition with them to make better local, state, because you're right, to the extent that there's any point in government, like local, like, you know, there is a degree of direct referendum in cities and states that there isn't at the federal level. Right. So, you know, there's more of a response to political pressure locally than there is federally. So I say that to them, like, right. Other than that, like, you know, my life is much more peaceful here. I can do more of the things that I want to do here than I would be able to do in California, or certainly would have been able to do 6 months ago. Right. It's still kind of weird and iffy there in California. And you can't unsee the behavior of the people that you saw during that period of time and how enthusiastic they were about it. Right. I do not know anyone here in Austin, even the people I know who are more right wing or maybe like more pro-life or whatever. I don't see any of them interested in chasing people down who are trying to sneak abortions after. I've not seen that. Right. The same way I saw people like patrolling, being mask Nancy's and, you know, all of that, you know, calling people out for walking in the park, not wearing a mask, or, you know, I've not seen anything like that. That doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, but I've not seen it. So it's a calculated, you know, like it's not perfect, but it is what it is. So it was interesting to listen to them have that conversation in relation to making these decisions to move around and whatnot. So I think that's what we're in, you know, right now. But I think the first thing, I think people really need to understand what people are talking about. And if someone who is in government is telling you that this is a democracy, then they're, in addition to all the other ways that they're lying to you about that. And they know that that's not true. So there's a real deeper purpose, right? They don't want people to discuss, if people suddenly become fatigued of the Constitution, they don't want them to be like, wait a second, maybe we shouldn't have a Constitution or a federal government. They would much rather them get fatigued to the other side and say, well, how about mob rule? Mm-hmm. right? Because they know that through their NGOs and the media and whatever, they can do a pretty good job at swaying and controlling the mob rule.
Mm-hmm.
That's all.
Okay.
All right. So we'll be in Afterwords, we'll be getting to our regularly scheduled programming and the usual banter and nonsense. So if you would like to join us for a dismemberment of the arguments of Tristan Harris and David Fuller, head over to Afterwords number 66 at wordspodcast.locals.com. Anything else from you, Dani?
That'll do it.
Oh, I wanted to throw one other idea out there. In the comment section, do not put your question, but in the comment section, just with a yes, you'd be interested, or no, you'd not, or raise your hand or something. I love the hand raising emoji. That's one of my favorite ones. We're thinking about doing a Q&A episode. We haven't decided yet if it would be like a pre-recorded thing or a live, if we can, if Dani can figure out how we can live stream. If people would be interested in Q&A, because we've never done a Q&A. And so if you're interested, if you would be interested, don't ask the question, but let us know you'd be interested, and then we'll work on formulating that for an upcoming episode. So, all right, see you on the other side.